I interviewed Sam Bankman-Fried, and he hated it so much that he left within minutes, in part because he didn't know he would be interviewed by me. He thought he was being interviewed by someone else on Twitter. And I snuck up in the DMs and got on the call and started peppering him with some harder questions. And within minutes of that, suddenly Mr. Open and Honest decided he needed to leave. But I didn't let that stop me because I joined an interview the very next day doing the exact same thing, ambushing him again, and I got some pretty good answers out of it. I think the running theme here is with this whole press tour, he's going with this image of, I'm embarrassed, I made a mistake, but I'm here to be open and honest now. But that's not true, because when you actually hit him with some hard questions, suddenly meetings come up, suddenly he can't talk, suddenly he's just Mr. Ums and Ahs. So I wanted to show both interviews. I think they're very interesting. I really wanted to press him on this $8 billion that mysteriously went missing that he didn't know about. And I'm sure I'm going to be breaking these down more specifically in the days to come. But for now, I just wanted you to enjoy these unedited conversations with Sam Bankman-Fried that he didn't know we'd be having.
Coffeezilla, the mic is yours, man.
Hey, thanks for having me. I just wanted to quickly ask, so there's this big question about this $8 billion that went into some kind of a stub account. If I just want to get some clarification on this, from my understanding, what you're basically claiming is that back when FTX didn't have banking, you'd use Silvergate to have people to wire money to Alameda Research and then credit them on the FTX side, but you didn't actually account for that money going back to them. So essentially you had like $8 billion coming to FTX you didn't have on the books, technically. I mean, can you explain more how that worked? Because it seems like such a key part of this whole thing. And so far we've gotten like very vague things about stub accounts. Just try to be as specific as you can on how that actually happened.
So, and again, some of these are things I'm trying to piece together that I don't have the full answer to, but I think that part of it was, I believe that there was, correct FTX accounting, in terms of, the audited financials, but that at least I can say that when you sort of pulled up, on a dashboard, what the accounts look like, it would not have, it wouldn't have displayed those transfers, and it wouldn't have displayed the balances related to those, which meant that it was that the sort of what you would naively see as the relevant sort of position size was quite a bit smaller than what the full position size was.
Specifically, you're talking about the funds that went into Alameda that was credited to on the customer side on FTX. Yeah, you're saying that basically when you looked at your dashboard, Alameda was using those funds to trade perhaps, but that ultimately you couldn't see that on the Alameda side because there was some kind of an accounting problem where there was a mix up with where it was credited. Is that the story?
Yeah, it's something roughly like that, or at the very least that the common displays of it did not include that piece of the accounting.
A real quick second follow-up. So I've talked to a few Alameda insiders, and I've kind of run them by your story of things. I think you probably are aware. I'm pretty skeptical. And one of them, when I told them could it be that Sam wouldn't know about this? Somebody who worked with you, and they actually they laughed and they said, "There's no way he's claiming to be stupid now when he was like this genius wonder kid." And so my sense of things is, how do you explain this? How do you explain the fact that some of the people who worked with you for years, your employees, have come out and said, there's no way he didn't know about these backdoors. There's no way he didn't know what Caroline was doing when you guys were very close. The offices were right next to each other. I mean, how do you expect us to believe this story you're spinning?
I mean, I don't know what to say. I had a lot going on, and I was spread thin. I was a bit less grounded than I had been before, and I lost track of a lot of important things. And I think that those
hang on one second. I think spread thin is one thing, right? I think things can get out of hand, but we're talking about a fundamental understanding of whether Alameda was commingling funds with FTX. I mean, I saw your Stephanopoulos and Sorkin interview, and you're pretty categorical that you had no idea that you were mingling funds. So that's what I'm asking about, not like, did you know exactly what was happening on November 7th or 8th? I mean, I can understand sort of things getting out of control, but we're talking about the most fundamental grasp on how your business worked. You're telling us you had no idea.
I was not aware of a lot of what was going on. I was vaguely aware that some of these systems existed. I had no details of them, and I was not spending much time and on looking at position risk management. It was a big mistake.
I mean,
All right, Sam. I've just got guys. I've just got a DM. Sam has to leave. So guys, Sam has to leave.
Mark? So yeah, I have a couple questions. Read the margin accounts. I mean, there's sort of all this talk about the terms of service. Did you break terms of service? Did you not? You're basically claiming that there was this separate side of your terms of service, which said that if people had margin accounts, you could use kind of their funds, or there was looser language around that. But I talked to somebody from Alameda and asked how big the position of or how many people had assets in the type of accounts that terms of service would apply to versus the regular terms of service, which said you couldn't use their money. And they said it was about $1 billion that was in the margin trading, or the margin side of things, where you could reuse their funds or whatever. And there was the rest of it was not there. So does that mean the rest of the money was stolen? I mean, it seems like you're putting all your eggs behind this one excuse about, there was this separate side of the terms of service. How do you address everyone else?
So I don't have all the data in front of me. My memory is that it was substantially more than $1 billion in the margin trading program. But I don't have that data in front of me right now, so I can't verify that. On top of that, there were other effects as well. And I don't have the data about all the details of those in front of me, but my understanding is that, some of those were, early wire transfers sent directly to Alameda, which I think contributed to the position as well. And then there are open futures positions on top of that, on top of the spot margin positions, where there can be effectively socialized, losses clawbacks if, one is unable to be closed in time. And so I think it was a combination of those factors. There may have been other factors too, but that's what I've been, able to piece together. And that, putting those together, I think is likely how you got to most of this, but again,
here's the thing: how do you account for maybe the difference in what people are hearing from insiders who are not being accused of fraud, and you, who sort of is? There's a very different sort of story going on here, where you're saying oh, there was this big position that we didn't know about, because you told me that the last time we spoke in a space, and I went and followed up and I said, hey, is this true? Could it be that this number just wasn't known about? And some Alameda insiders said, no way. You could see on dashboards really simply where it was. And FTX dashboards, not Alameda dashboards, dashboards that you yourself had access to. So my question is sort of it seems like when I go to Alameda insiders or FTX insiders, they're saying this story makes no sense. But when I go to you, who sort of has every incentive to sort of lie and obfuscate, because obviously the incentive here is, well, otherwise you might go to jail, which obviously would be a very bad thing for you. It seems like all of a sudden all the excuses come out, and then when we follow up on them, they don't seem to be true. So I don't know, help me square this, because, it'd be nice if you were telling the truth, but everything we're hearing from insiders is that you're not.
I don't know what to tell you. I'm saying what I believe. I don't know which insiders you're talking about. I don't know exactly what they said. It doesn't line up with my beliefs, but I can't speak to what they think or what they said.
But why are multiple people within your company at less senior roles knowing more about the company than you?
And Alameda was not a company that was running at the time, but I hear you. I'm sorry. I don't know exactly what you're referring to. I don't know who you're talking about. I don't know what they said. I don't.
Well, I'm telling you what some of what they said. I mean, for example,
And
one of them
I
was
know it,
that there was like that backdoor system or whatever. A, that you knew it existed, and B, that it was easy to see the balance or the position of Alameda very simply on FTX dashboards because
uh,
they had a margin trading account with you guys, so you guys could have seen it.
but
You guys
uh,
could see the margin positions of
but
everybody. No,
but a lot of the position did not appear in that main account.
so where was the position?
It was in a separate stub account, I believe, related to wire transfers that had been sent, to Alameda Research, generally primarily to FTX, having its own bank accounts.
So who controlled the secret stub account?
I
Did
I'm
anyone at Alameda know about this secret stub account? I mean, are we supposed to believe that just like there was this stub account that nobody knew about?
I don't know who knew about what when. I'm sorry.
I mean, clearly somebody lost the money, right? Like, obviously the money went somewhere. Somebody lost it. It just seems really convenient that $8 billion was located in this like account that didn't show up when you pulled up Alameda's balances, right?
Yeah, I don't know what to tell you.
Okay, so a separate question is obviously around this Forbes thing because you've said you don't have present knowledge of sort of like Alameda's balances, and they came out and said that you were giving them up to date balances from Alameda. How do you square that? Just as of a month ago, you knew Alameda's position. How does
I was
that
giving.
square with your statement about like you don't know what's going on?
I haven't seen the thing that you're referring to, but I was able to give very rough approximations that included a subset of the list of assets that Alameda had. Um, I by asking about the assets I believe to be the largest sets of them. I was not giving full accountings. Um, I of all of Alameda's balances or positions, because I didn't generally have those, and because it was a complicated process dependent on liquidity of tokens and things like that from the Forbes perspective. So I was just sending them a sort of abbreviated partial list of Alameda assets periodically.
But that means you knew that what Alameda had, even roughly, you knew what Alameda had.
I had a rough sense of what their assets are. That is correct. By rough, I do mean to within $10 billion or so. I did not have a fine grained sense of what their total asset value was, and I did not have a fine grained sense of their liabilities or of their margin position size or how that was split up.
I guess one of my questions is like, what do you think should be done if we find out that you're lying about all of this? Like, sort of, because it's kind of one thing to steal people's money; it's another thing to lie about it. What do you think should be done? Like, because I mean, it's going to be obviously a lot of this is going to eventually get litigated. Eventually Caroline Ellison's going to have to take the stand. What happens if she pulls out text messages that shows you knew about it? I mean, do you think that wipes away your credibility?
I mean, I think a lot of my credibility has already been wiped away, frankly. And
I think that's fair.
honestly, that's not what I'm thinking about right now. I'm not trying to focus on, my I'm just thinking about like customers here who I think are what matter.
So you're saying there's a chance for them to get money back or for us to get our money back?
I don't want to speak out of turn, and I can't make promises on behalf of the company. I can't speak on behalf of the company. And I don't know what decisions everyone's going to make. I do know that FTX US, to my knowledge, is totally solvent and could, I think, return everyone's money tomorrow if it wanted to. And I think internationally, there are a lot of pathways, potentially forward there that one could imagine FTX International taking. I think, I know that as of before I filed, there were billions of dollars of serious funding offers potentially on the table. And I would expect and hope that those are being deeply
Who were those
explored.
funding offers?
I don't know that I have authority to say.
Well, you said you had $4
they-
billion like
Yep.
that came in, right?
Yep.
Is that still, does that still exist? Was that ever real?
I think it. I mean, I think it. I don't know for sure, but I think that some of those might. It. I. My guess is that some of them might. That and I. I hope that the sort of relevant teams are doing whatever they can to maximize value for customers here.
Yeah, it just kind of doesn't make a lot of sense why someone would pour $4 billion when you guys have liabilities sort of as high as you do. Can you talk a bit about the mark to market like statements you were making around solvency? You're making some pretty outrageous statements about like FTX, had the money when a lot of it was Serum, FTT, these tokens that you can't sell in those amounts, and that would completely crash the price. They can't support that kind of selling. Were you kind of deliberately misleading people there?
So, what I can say is I was just thinking about them in terms of, well, their market price was just whatever their market price was at the time, and obviously I was cognizant of the fact that, that you can't the market price isn't necessarily, I mean, is never what you could sell a large amount of something for, but I also massively misjudged that discrepancy there. And
what do you mean you massively misjudged it? Because you knew sort of roughly the percentage of Serum and FTT you held, and you knew the trading volume. I mean, you are a smart guy. You're a professional trader. There's no way you make a simple mistake like that, right? Like, how's that even possible?
I mean, it was a pretty big misjudgment and mistake that I made, and a pretty embarrassing one. But I was thinking of it internally in the context of standard market environment, and obviously that still means substantial impact. But it's a different scale than what you would see, than what we did see in the market crash that happened, where without selling, without liquidating the position, there was a much larger than 50% market crash in a few day period, with very little bid side liquidity, and that obviously history has said again and again that those events are possible, those very correlated market crashes, and not just very correlated market crashes in those instruments, but ones where hedges don't end up working fully or even
right.
much
But
at
we
all.
don't even need to have this market crash for the statement about mark to market accounting making no sense, right? And you just said that yourself. Even with standard movements, right? If you tried to sell the amount of Serum or FTT that you had on the books, you wouldn't have gotten half. You wouldn't have gotten a quarter of what you put on your books to investors. And so the question is like, we know that you're not. The problem is like every time it comes to this hard point, the answer seems to always be, I made an embarrassing mistake. But at what point are you going to say like, no, I'm a smart guy, right? You were at the highest levels of this entire industry. You were the guy to go to, the smartest guy in the room, right? It's hard to believe that you made this many embarrassing mistakes. One embarrassing mistake, I get it. But everything's an embarrassing mistake. At least tell us that you knew that the mark to market made no sense.
And the way that I was thinking about risk at score was starting with mark to market and then adjusting down effectively from that. And obviously that means that there should be a real buffer because of exactly what you're saying. That buffer should have been a lot larger than I was thinking of.
But you never went down from risk from there. And you said publicly, FTX is solvent. Other views may differ. Well, there is no other view on it. There's the fact of how markets work, and you were making public misleading statements. It wasn't one time you did this. You continued to make misleading statements about it after people had given you pushback.
Sorry,
So
which times are you talking about here?
I think it was in one of your follow-ups about the what happened. You said something about other views may differ.
Oh, that was FTX US, was it not?
I'm going to look it up real quick. I got a quick question about Dan Friedberg, your chief regulatory officer. This is a guy. So
I'm
obviously,
gonna. I don't feel comfortable like talking about other people without getting sort of their sign off on that. So I think there's a limited extent to which I'm gonna be willing, or feel comfortable, speaking on others' behalves.
No, that's totally fair, and I don't want you to speak on his behalf. Obviously, I want you to share your perspective, your unique perspective on the situation. Just like the same, I might ask a question about Caroline Ellison, but I only could
Right.
expect your position on the situation. So, kind of the situation there is obviously this is sort of a tale of two stories about how FTX failed. One is like a lack of regulation, a lack of clarity, the kind of just this thing that accumulated over time. The other one is, of course, a story of fraud. Of course, we have to look at who were the adults in the room. One of the adults, obviously, was Dan Friedberg, chief regulatory officer. I'm sure you're aware he was behind the ultimate bet scandal where he gave players God mode in a poker game where people could see the hands, and he actually like basically conspired with Russ Hamilton to hide that. So does that suggest something about your intention that you hired a guy that basically one of his biggest achievements was hiding fraud? Can you explain sort of your thinking? I know you don't want to talk about him. Can you explain your thinking about why this would be the guy you choose as the chief regulatory officer?
Um, we had a number of people in the legal department. We had that was maybe our fastest growing department. We had a number of outside law firms as well. Dan was obviously one of the people who had been working for FTX for a while.
Yeah, he's the chief guy. He should have caught some of this stuff, you'd think, in theory.
Well, when you say he's the chief guy, I mean there's we also had general counsels. We had other positions as well, but I but I can't speak to what other people's views were, what they thought or knew or were intending when but I know that like our legal and regulatory team had an enormous task in front of them. We were looking to get licensed and regulated in dozens of jurisdictions at once. We did end up doing that. That was an unbelievably large undertaking, which I think took up most of the time of most of our legal and compliance departments. And in retrospect, I think probably took up too much time. But at the end of the day, I was CEO, and that means that at the end of the day, it's on me to make sure that we have people who are in charge of all of the important things. And I did that for some of the areas. I failed to do that for others. And
But why'd you choose him specifically? I mean, obviously, you could have chosen a lot of different lawyers to go with. And I understand you had multiple lawyers, but if this story of FTX is largely a failure of regulation, a failure of controls at an organization, and your chief regulatory officer is Dan Friedberg, the question is, well, maybe this wouldn't have happened if you hadn't put a guy like this in front of this. I'm not obviously saying it's his fault solely, but I'm just asking sort of what was the thinking behind putting this guy in charge? Because it seems like you couldn't pick a less qualified candidate if you want to get actual regulation in the room.
I'm pretty I didn't say this was a failure of regulation. And we did an enormous amount of work on getting licensed and regulated. We're licensed in more jurisdictions than I think any other exchange was. I think it was absolutely a failure of oversight of risk management. Um, but I, but and I think that, you know, in retrospect, I would have viewed the core duties and things I needed to make sure of more so than anything else very differently than I did. But from a, you know, becoming licensed perspective, we did do quite a bit there, and were able to accomplish that in, you know, in a fairly short period of time. And so I think I'm not sure that I completely agree with the premise of that framing of the question. And, you know, I'll just say that, like, the people who work with FTX, like, I have enormous respect for most of them, and they, you know, did enormously valuable work. And you know, they didn't do all the work. Obviously, there are really important things that didn't get done. But that's on me as CEO to make sure that there are people who are doing all of the important things, because there's way too much to do. We're doing way too much as a company for, you know, any particular person to be expected to be definitely on top of even of some important things, given how many other important things they also had to be dealing with at the time. So, and by the way, I do apologize. I am fairly late at this point. For the next thing, I do have to hop off.
Sam, thank you so much for your time, and Coffeezilla and other, you know, speakers. Thank you so much, Marty. Everybody, thank you so much.